and welcome to the Life Burst Podcast. We are going to talk about the new centers from the upcoming set that's coming out. Remember Diva. And what better thing to remember than Ray? Now, Ray did pretty well in the around the second and third ceremonies. And I think that this Ray is better. I think it has a better once again ability, and I think it also has a more freer version of damage that's pretty rare in blue. So I think it's actually pretty okay in the meta. Plus, it has a discard sort of like angle, and as much as I hate to say it, discard's pretty good in the meta in general. So any amount of discard is usually pretty good if you can just put a critical mass in there. Blue doesn't really struggle with putting a critical mass of blue discard in there. So you're probably pretty well set. Now, before I go heavy into it, one of the things that I really wanted to do with Ray was make Ray into a blue, black, white deck. I have found that when we've talked with Tiffany a lot about her Umir deck that she's been running, and actually been kind of sweeping the meta with. It's been very much a sleeper in this set. Is that playing a lot of white bounce effects and pairing it with blue discard does not always work out very well, because you're fueling the opponent's hand with cards and then trying to get rid of those cards as well. The difference is with this deck is, even though I tried to figure out a way to make it work, I couldn't. There's just not enough support in blue, white, black yet to make this deck function the way that I needed to. Damage output, by the way, is what I'm talking about. Instead, we went double white, and we're going to focus on being more of a tempo deck. We're going to be pretty aggressive. And between a lot of different white, quote-unquote, white removal that we have in the Elrig deck, it's actually going to come out pretty okay. So let's talk about what the new Ray does. This is a level 2, level 3, cost 2, blue card. It could be played in no limit, and that's another way that I considered putting this together, was a no limit version. I actually think if you do that, it would be pretty okay. But I think no limit starts getting worse as the meta progresses, due to things just like better defensive measures, and also Machina Guardian Dragon. There's some pieces that stop team pieces. Like, I just think generally speaking, there is reasons as to why no limit is starting to become a little less played. But I think still you are valid if you want to play this in a no limit deck, and kind of play it like old Ray, which was more red and blue oriented, sort of your classic Wixoss tempo. This has a auto ability at the beginning of your attack phase. If you've drawn 2 or more cards by any of card's effects this turn, you can target 1 blue Signy on your field. You can discard up to 3 cards from your hand. If you do, that Signy gains Assassin until end of turn. It has the enter ability of draw a card and enter charge 1, which will help you, by the way, hit your first auto ability. And then its action once per game. This Elrig gains auto twice a turn. When a card from your opponent's life cloth is crushed, draw 1 card or discard 1 card from your opponent's hand till end of turn. This is kind of cool. The way that works is it'll avoid being Xenoclustered, which is actually pretty big, and it can strip guards out before she attacks. Also very cool. Overall, the effect being discard 3 is a real cost, guys. And arguably, you might say it could be worse than the pay 2 I have. I can open a lane and enter deprive the opponent, like Ray number 1 does. But it is freer. It's freer in the fact that it doesn't cost you enter. So the deck's going to basically, when you read this, you basically can read 2 things that you want then. You want blue cards, and you want to draw lots of cards. The discarding of your opponent's hand, while it does do that, it's not the main focus of this deck. However, if you told me, hey, you're going to play a blue deck, it wants to draw a bunch of cards, it also would like to make your opponent discard cards, and it's blue. I would immediately tell you the best card that you could play is Firefly Squid. So you're basically, this deck is built around Firefly Squid, which is pretty good, right? So let's just pretend that you have a Firefly Squid on the field as well. Um, Firefly Squid being that at the beginning of your attack phase, you can draw a card. That's amazing with Ray. You've already drawn one on your turn 3 because of your ability on Ray, and now you've drawn another card that puts you at 2. Hey, that's valid for Ray's ability to now make something into Assassin if you discard 3 cards. Cool, you discard 3 cards to make that happen. Oh, hey, Firefly Squid saw you discard 3 cards. Guess what? The opponent has to discard a card at random, and that random effect is really annoying. So it ends up being pretty good there. One of the reasons that I got pushed into double white here is because, hey, what if you play 2 Firefly Squids? Then let's pretend it's turn 4, right? So you haven't drawn any cards this turn. Beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card from Firefly Squid. Beginning of your upkeep, you draw a Firefly Squid, second version of it. Hey, you've just drawn 2 cards now. Let's discard 3 cards. Cool, you discard 3 cards. That makes your opponent then discard 2 cards at random, and you give something Assassin. So if you look at it with the fact that if you had 2 Firefly Squids out, right? And you have to have the double white because of the Harmony, you end up with this very sweet Ray that says at the beginning of your attack phase, discard 1 card, right? Because you drew 2 cards off of your Firefly Squid, so 3 take away 2 is 1. Discard a card, make your opponent discard 2 cards, and give a blue card Assassin. That is mind-breakingly amazing. That's one of your best outputs. Now, you can kind of do that a little bit with another card on here that's a little bit of a wacky include, which is Honey Honey Ice. Honey Ice is a team that we're not doing. We're not that team, clearly. But it does have an auto ability, which is at the beginning of your attack phase, each player draws 1 card. You look at your opponent's hand. You can discard a card without guard from among it. Actually, you put it at the bottom. You put it at the bottom of the deck, so it's even better than discard. It's really good, right? 1, this triggers Firefly Squid on its own. So if you don't manage to do your discard 3 and you have a Firefly Squid out, cool. You can still do it. The second thing is, while it's draw an extra card for you, so it's still kind of like Firefly Squid on that end. So it's just a little bit more of synergy for this deck, and that's what I'm saying. The main deck is pretty much built around. To back it up, we're going to be playing Lion Dig and Lion Disrespect. This is just sort of like your go-to if you're like, yeah, I want to play white and I also want to go late game. This is sort of your go-to that you end up with. The other, and we're not going to go late game, by the way, guys. We're planning to go turn 4 or 5 with this deck. So MC Lion will basically always guarantee you to get to turn 4. Turn 5 is a little bit more iffy, but I suppose theoretically you're making your opponents discard a bunch of cards in this deck. And by doing that, they might not have the offensive power they could to push forward on the turn 5. You're also drawing a bunch of cards, so you're probably getting a lot of guards. So I think you'll get to turn 5 with this deck. But again, I'm not calling this deck a turn 6 deck. This is you're happy to get to turn 5 if you can do it, but you're looking to probably aim for the turn 4, turn 5 win. Probably turn 4. And we say turn 4 because if you put Anj in a deck, you're basically saying I'm going to try to win on turn 4 with my white cards. Anj bounces cards back to hand. Anj level 2 opens up 2 lanes by making your opponent bouncing a Signy and also trashing a Signy. This is the hallmark of I'm a turn 4 deck, where you're saying I've got MC Lion against the other aggro decks, or just any 3-stop Elrig against the other aggro decks, and I'm also playing Anj to open up 2 lanes. It's basically you just admitting that you're a tempo deck at that point. We're also playing White Heaven. We're playing 2 white Elrigs. It would be stupid not to play White Heaven at that point. All of your damage output's probably going to be coming from the Elrig deck now because you've got those stuff. But because you also have access to Assassin, you don't need more damage output in your Elrig deck, which frees you up to play Xenocluster. Xenocluster just is really good in this deck. The draw 3 cards can help you on your next turn to inevitably do more Assassin. but really protecting your enter is more important. You've got a lot of enter costs here. 5 here, 2 here, 3 here, 2 here, right? So you just want to protect your enter at that point. That's really what it's mainly there for. Um, Moving into the main deck, all of our main decks basically focused on refilling our hand for that discard stuff, right? And we have a lot of ways to sort of pad our hand, right? MC Lion's a good way to do it as well, MC Lion Dig. Um, but we need more ways to pad our hand. And Sui is not and I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. If you guys message me, it'll never be in any of my videos for the deck list because I'm recording these all in advance. But this is one of the ways that you can't pad your hand, but it actually enables Firefly Squid on its own. And one of the things that the deck might struggle with is a turn 4 Firefly Squid enabling. It doesn't struggle with a turn 3, but turn 4, turn 5, it might struggle with it a bit. This is a way to just turn that on immediately. You're also playing another card that combos with this. It's a Blast from the Past. Hijikata. So I'd actually fit 4 Hijikata in this deck if I could. But I just wanted to point out that this card where you, when its enter abilities, you can discard up to 2 cards from your hand and draw 2 cards, turns on Hijikata. And that's great. To also help turn on Hijikata, and this does also help theoretically pad cards in your hand. You've got Goggiel. Goggiel's Life Burst is what I'm saying when it pads cards in your hand. There's a lot of blue Life Bursts here where it actually matters that you draw cards by, you might have a hand that's of 0 on your opponent's turn, and then you hit a couple Life Bursts, you now start your turn with 5 cards in hand, the opponent's like, crap, I'm getting assassined, and yep, you're getting assassined. So Hijikata is kind of a negative effect. It doesn't actually work with Assassin, because you'd rather this kill something. It works better with Lancer. But it is early game discard, and between having 4 Bruno and 2 Hijikatas, and then Firefly Squids in the late game, as well as Code Honey Order, you're really, really just screwing the opponent out of cards in hand. And it's gonna be good. You're not playing it like a control deck would, where you're grinding out their resources to give yourself a long game advantage. You're grinding out their resources early on, hoping, by the way, to get guards. This is worth mentioning that this says your opponent chooses a card to discard. This one does say at random, and so having more at random effects really does help just get the opponent down on cards. Not to mention you're playing random drains, right? Just random drains is another good way to enable Ray's abilities, filter your hand through, and also discard your opponent out. So it's just fantastic all around. We're also playing Hakats. Hakats are brutally underplayed in the Japanese meta and super correctly played in the American meta, in my opinion. This is just one of the best one-drops that you could be playing in Wixoss. Having a utility that is free, is a Signy, and is also able to attack. You can give it Assassin, by the way, is fantastic. In Magic, if there was a Ponder on a stick and it was free and it cost 1 mana, everyone would be playing it, so it's obscene that this card was just not super recognized in the Japanese meta. We went over Code Honey Order, we went over Goggiel. Again, we've got more level 1s here that turn on our, that just give us more cards in hand. This replaces itself. It finds guards, and the Life Burst is relevant in terms of it gets us cards in hand and also blocks lanes. And between this and Remember, we have enough white to justify us playing MC Lion Disrespect and always hitting that ability. And MC Lion Disrespect is a little tougher to play in this deck because you are discarding your hand, but you can just choose not to do the Ray effect for a turn if that means you're going to lose by not putting a full 3-stop out there. So, do it at your own risk. One of the newer cards that we're going to be playing is this card, Futsuse? I don't know. Again, correct me in the comments below. I'll do my best to learn it before the end of the season. And it has a constant ability, which is if there are more cards in your hand than the opponent's hand, this Signy gains Shadow level 2 or less Signy during your opponent's turn. It also has a Life Burst, and the Life Burst is really good. Target one of the L rigs or Signy your opponent on your opponent's field. When it attacks this turn, you disable that attack unless the opponent discards 3 cards from their hand. There's enough discard in this deck that basically just says stop an L-Rig attack, stop a Signy attack. Being able to stop a Signy attack or stop an L-Rig attack is almost as good as a Folklore Life Burst, because often you get that third Signy attack in, it stops you from being able to block a damage they attack in with their L-Rig. This basically acts as a guard in that scenario, lets you keep a guard in hand, which maybe you later discard to Ray, or you use later in the game to extend the game out to turn 5. A fantastic card. You almost always will have more cards than the opponent, unless you're in a discard mirror, in which case it's debatable, but this card is fine in a discard mirror because there doesn't really need shadow in those mirrors. Another thing that you could do is this is more like if your meta is full of like X's or these red decks that like tend to remove stuff and you need more shadow, you could swap out your Hikats into the Zhaoyuns, and that would allow you to end up with about 6 versions of things that gain shadow. That'll give you a good defense against that type of deck. That's just a thought I had when building the deck, but I decided I didn't want necessarily 12 white cards. So just something you can think about. The last card to go over here, I guess there's more than that. There's Thrilling. Thrilling also plays double duty. It can enable discards if you need it for Firefly Squid or Hijikata, but it also, and Digging as well, by the way, but it also ends up being a late game hand refiller. One of these, draw 3 cards, means that basically this says pay 1 enter, give target Signy on your field Assassin with Ray. So it ends up being very good in that scenario. We don't have really any other ways to use our Exceed, so you're pretty much only going to ever Exceed with this. The last one is Remember. Remember is going to be an insanely good card just in here on out. So any deck that is playing white in any amount will probably want to play Remember as well. To go over what this deck does, the action abilities of your opponent's L-Rigs and Signy cost 1 more on your opponent's turn. That includes things like Souls, by the way, which is pretty fantastic. Its constant abilities when this is downed, aka when it attacks or when it uses its ability. This gains plus 3,000 power, and your opponent can't guard unless they pay 1. Taxing your opponent is always pretty good. And taxing your opponent pretty free because you just play this for the first ability itself is pretty good. It's got an action ability. Look at the top card of your Life Cloth. That will help you if you are in situations where you're like, yeah, you know what? I don't need to give my opponent enter, and I don't need to attack with this. Let me look at the top card of my Life Cloth just in case. That'll allow you to look at it and be like, oh, cool, I have a Haniel there. I can let 2 of my lanes be open. I don't need to pull off the MC line Disrespect this turn. And it'll make you let you take better judgment calls. It's minor, but it's there. Its Life Burst is target an up Signy on your opponent's field and return to their hand, or draw a card. Again, you really actually like Life Bursts that say draw a card in this deck. So that way you can constantly be using your Ray as well as your line Disrespect costs for this thing. And that's the deck. I found it's actually pretty good. It's pretty solid. It's definitely one of these tempo decks. There's quite a few blue-white tempo decks right now. You've got Madoka that's also like that. You also have Umir. If I had to judge which I think was better, I'm going to honestly say I like the Umir deck the best. I actually have seen Tiffany take down the entire loot card tournaments with it, and it's pretty surprising. I don't know if enough people have played Umir to make it just like she's just playing a rogue deck and no one really knows how to play against it, or if it's like a real meta threat. I think it might be a real meta threat. So I like Umir better. I also like Madoka a little bit better. Madoka just turbos out late game discard, which is really nice. But this has a niche that the other decks don't have, which is this one can really consistently get early damage. It kind of has that going for it that's similar to mono white in that deck. It's really a mono white blue discard hybrid deck. So I think it is good in certain metas, and as it might be an offbeat option for you. I put this deck as a C in the metagame. maybe a C plus in the metagame, which is pretty good. Literally anything over a C in the metagame, in my opinion, are very meta good decks to play, and you could play with all of the decks and have a very good chance at winning. So that's the deck in a nutshell. Let me know what you guys think. Go ahead and message down below if you're excited for Ray, if there's another L rig that you're more excited about. Tell me any and all thoughts that you have.